I've just always wondered what it would be like to grow up with a grandma or grandpa. Like, how much wisdom do they bestow to you, or do they bestow to your mom or dad, their child, versus how much do they just be like, yeah, not my problem. My child will figure it out in their own time. My grandchild will figure it out in their own time. Hi, welcome back. Sarah here. Today, we've got the High Priestess for the Top Tarot Trumps times Tarot Memoirs hashtag dual tag combination I'm doing. I will share 3 moments or energies that I feel represent the High Priestess energy and 5 of my favorite High Priestess cards across all of my different decks. So, Tarot Memoirs, High Priestess moments or energy. So the High Priestess energy has been something that I didn't quite understand for a while. I feel like sometimes I understand and sometimes I don't. And that's largely because I am a secular reader. I am atheist or agnostic, really. When people or books say the High Priestess is about like, you already know all the answers, or like, wait for the universe to give you the answers, I feel like I don't really understand what that means. I also feel like a part of that lack of understanding, lack of connection, is because I myself tend to be very active. I tend to desire a very active life, different things going on, different hobbies, different interests, different friend groups. I just like having stimulation of all kinds. The idea of like sitting down, maybe receiving information, maybe not being involved, listening to my own intuition, like as a secular reader, as an agnostic person who doesn't really have a grasp on like the divine or anything that spiritual, I just didn't really have any understanding about it. I took the past couple weeks and just meditated on different aspects of the High Priestess, just thought more about like the meanings of the High Priestesses. I consulted the different tarot books and the different tarot websites I have bookmarked, and just thought more about what the High Priestess means and how I can connect to it in my own way. The High Priestess archetype or experience also tends to be, as the book Tarot for One by Courtney Weber puts it, a new, deeply mystical experience. I just have never had any experiences where I truly felt like, oh, this was very mysterious. Oh, it was very mystical. I just tend to feel not very connected to mystical or super spiritual experiences. Oh, and I also want to add that I don't really identify with or connect with like women in the traditional sense. I guess the traditional sense is like women who have like longer hair or who are more feminine, or who are like, I guess, conventionally thought of as women. I just don't really identify with like being a woman. So the High Priestess, who is usually depicted as a woman, it just wasn't an archetype or an imagery that just made sense to me or that I really connected with. But I think I have found 3 examples of High Priestess energy that I can explain and connect with in my own way, being the person, non-gender specific sort of person that I am. Okay, so examples of the High Priestess energy in my own experience, in my own way of connecting. The first example here is my life coach's approach to sessions. So I've been seeing a life coach for many, many years, since I was like 23 and I'm 29 now, so 5-6 years. My life coach is a wonderful, like over 60-year-old Black woman, and I really, really value not only her expertise, but the way that she presents that sort of expertise and guidance to me. The way that she explained life coaching to me at the very beginning, and the way that I've experienced it, is that life coaching tends to just be about any areas of life that I just need coaching on. Whereas therapy, which I've experienced twice, once in college and once with couples therapy tends to be more about diving deeper into specific issues and unknotting them and really getting deep in there, really getting your hands in the brains and doing the therapy stuff to unknot it, reprocess past traumas and past things like that. Of course, every therapist's approach is different, so the things that I experience with my life coach, people may already experience with their therapists, but for me, my life coach experience has been, I just ask her or I talk to her about the things going on in my life. Sometimes it's friendship troubles, relationship troubles, work troubles, motivation to get back on track with my goals, or sometimes I need to reassess my goals. The way that I relate the High Priestess to my life coach is that when I present issues to her and I ask her questions, she doesn't tell me specifically like what she thinks I should do. She doesn't tell me what she would do either. She asks me more questions. Sometimes the questions are for her to get context on the situation, but sometimes the questions are also helping me realize things that I didn't realize about the situation before. What do you think about this solution? Or what kind of solutions have you already thought of? Are there any approaches to the situation that you could think of? So the things that she asks, the ways that she responds to me asking for her for help, the whole way that she approaches these sessions is it really helps me build more of my own wisdom, and that feels like the lessons of the High Priestess are to me. I am someone who can be very susceptible to outside influence, so outside advice, outside opinions, And of course, like my life coach, who I subconsciously place on like a more correct, like I see her advice as more correct than my own. Like, that's not what she wants. She doesn't want me to do what she would do. She wants me to do what I think is right for me, based on my personality, based on my circumstances. Sometimes I will actually ask for advice what she would do. And she still frames it in a way that she's like, I would consider this. I would consider this. It might be awkward if I did this. And so I take her opinions with a grain of salt. I consider her opinions and then I still make my own choice based on what she's told me. So that feels like High Priestess energy, just guiding someone to realize their own wisdom and their own correct choices instead of pushing my own opinion or offering my own opinion or advice too early. This is something I have also been more mindful of recently because I know that sometimes I can also be eager to offer my own advice and my own opinion and my own like, oh my God, I think you should do this. Or I get excited for the other person. I think the High Priestess lesson, the High Priestess energy here is more like let's say my friend asks me, she tells me her whole situation and she asks me, what do you think I should do? Instead of me offering my own opinion right away, I want to ask my friend like more questions about what she thinks. And has she run into similar situations in the past? I just want to try to ask more questions and maybe validate the other person instead of, again, like offering my own opinion because my own opinion is flawed. Even though my friend is asking me what she should do, like what I would do is not the same as what my friend would or should do. I don't want my friend to be a copy or a clone of me. I don't want my friend to think that my opinion is always like better or that she should always be asking me for advice on what to do. I want my friend to trust her own wisdom and her own intuition. I don't really understand what intuition is a lot of the time, but I think when I do understand intuition, it's like a feeling when you just kind of know in your heart of hearts that this is the right way to move forward based on your past experiences, based on what you believe to be true. But anyway, so that is one energy, one example of High Priestess to me. Just asking questions, leading the person, leading the querent to find their own answers within, instead of copying someone else's answer of what they would do and then just implementing that in their own lives. I also shared with another friend this revelation I had recently, and he said that in his own experiences being trained as a mentor, that's what they train you to do as well. Like when your mentee is asking you, like, what should they do? Your job as a mentor is not to answer and tell them like what you as a mentor would do. Your job is to guide them to their own answers. So I feel validated that I'm kind of on the right track for me. So another example of High Priestess energy is the opposite of force involvement, like being a micromanager or just butting in where you're not really needed or welcome. For me, being involved or being in the know has been a way of asserting control over my situation and over the people around me, really. And I remember vividly, like I was a part of a writing role-playing group on Tumblr when I was in high school through college. And in adolescent and adulthood, we pick up a lot of habits that we aren't conscious that we're picking up. I, at the time, just didn't have much control over like my general situations. I was living with my parents. My parents had a lot of control and sway over what I did every day and the people I could talk to and the things that I was allowed to do every day. The outlet, the desire for control, expressed itself in a way that I became very much a micromanager. I had a strong grip on like the different people in our writing role-playing group. Like we had activity limits, I guess activity grace periods of like at least every 4 days you have to log on and write. But I was so a micromanager. Like I was checking when people logged on. I was checking like how often they interacted with other people. I was checking what else? Like the quality of their writing. And, at the time, I thought it was me trying to help the group be better. But in hindsight, I can see now that it was just way too micromanaging. I had no business like actually managing like what people wrote about and the quality of their writing. Like who cares if they applied to get in and they were passable? Like let them have fun. We're not doing this for a grade. And I wish I could have seen that back then instead of, me exerting all this extra energy into micromanaging literally like everybody on the team. Honestly, it's a miracle that we had as many people as we did and that like my co-admins sort of admined with me still, because I look back at those times when I was such a micromanager and I'm like, I wish you had spent your time doing better things. This micromanager tendency still carried on into college. Like the club that I was in, the organization I was in, I was president at one point, and I still had micromanager tendencies. So instead of like letting people do their different jobs that they were elected to do, I still like wanted to help them do it by just doing part of it myself instead of just delegating the tasks fully to them and supporting them doing it. This forced involvement is truly the opposite of what High Priestess energy is. And now as an adult, I do see that better. Like when your friend tells you some gossip or some drama or some personal problems between them and another friend, it's not my job to go to that other friend and then help them solve their problem. My job is just to be here, to listen impartially, to just be here as a space. Maybe they do want advice. Maybe my friend just wants a space to vent for me to listen impartially without actually acting on it. So that's what High Priestess energy means to me. Like, not forced involvement, just letting things run their course on their own, just being present and just letting things happen on their own. The third example of High Priestess energy to me is meditation. So I have also had trouble like meditating throughout my entire life. When I was a teen, my dad would often drag me along to go to meditation halls with him. My dad is someone who is very into philosophy, and he was pretty into Buddhism for a while, and he really enjoys meditation halls. As a teen, I really disliked these meditation halls. I felt it was so unfair for me to be dragged out of my house and to have to go to this boring place to sit down and or walk around in complete silence. You know, no phones, no books, no nothing. I felt so bored, and I felt like it was such torture to me. At the time, what I needed wasn't like just a quiet space. I needed real connection. And at the time as a teen, I just didn't really connect with my parents or any of my real friends, so I just felt very lost and kind of abandoned in a way. But now as an adult, I see a lot of value in meditation, in clearing away the clutter, just allowing the thoughts to pass through. That's something that I've kind of realized about meditation. Meditation isn't only like sitting down completely still for an hour. It's just the act of letting your thoughts pass through. You're not judging or acting on your thoughts, you're just noticing them. Meditation is choosing in action. So one way of getting into this High Priestess mode, High Priestess energy, is by just meditating. My past self might have felt like, what a weird answer, like just meditate on it. But I find that, like I said, meditating isn't just sitting down and completely being silent. It's just really a chance to reflect on the situation. It could be a chance to just let thoughts pass by. It could also just be a chance to take a break from thinking about the situation, like on and on and on and on. I found that with situations where I really need to find an answer, or it's just really been racking my brain, just take a full-on break from it and take a step back from it actually helps me relax my brain muscles a little bit, and it helps me find the solution better than if I spent 24/7 like actually trying to think about it over and over again. And even though the traditional connotation of meditating, of like sitting down and just being completely silent, isn't something that comes naturally to me, the times that I do feel like I need some sort of meditative time is when I feel like, okay, I need to cut back on all the stimulation happening around me right now. So that means stop listening to music for the time being, stop having videos playing in the background, stop forcing myself to try to come up with solutions to everything or put down plans to everything right now. Maybe I'm journaling, or I'm crocheting, or I'm just doing something that requires very little actual brain power. And again, not listening to any other stimulation in the background. So I'm just letting myself get into a very meditative kind of flow state. I feel like that exemplifies High Priestess energy, High Priestess mode for me. So now to the top tarot trumps part, sharing 5 of my favorite High Priestess cards across all the different decks. So in the Magician video, I mentioned that I had trouble finding 5 magicians that really stood out to me or that I really connected with, because a lot of the magicians in decks tend to be just someone carrying the 4 elements. Since I'm someone who likes to read more with scenes than just symbolism, I like to see different things happening in different decks, and I get tired of the imagery that's just someone sitting between 2 pillars. The 5 High Priestesses that really stood out to me across all my decks, let's see. The first one I'll mention is the Way of the Panda Tarot High Priestess. And we see a panda who seems to be out on like a moonlit walk, a beautiful celestial crown on them, and they're just staring out like in the night sky at these beautiful blue and pink plants around them. I remember the guidebook does mention something about going on a walk and just listening to nature. This exemplifies what I was just mentioning about the meditation part of the High Priestess, where High Priestess energy, isn't about acting and doing things all the time. Sometimes it's just taking a rest, taking a break, simply taking time to observe and just let everything flow in and out of my consciousness, in and out of my thought process. The High Priestess of the Way of the Panda does remind me to take a walk sometimes, especially at night when things maybe aren't as super lit and overwhelming and overstimulating as they might be in the daytime. Just take a walk, just enjoy the peacefulness right now, and there's no need to make sense of everything, just kind of observe things how they are. Another calm High Priestess is from the Spacious Tarot. We see a seashell on the edge of the beach next to the waves of the ocean, and inside the shell we see a moon and some black sky. So one way of seeing this is that things are not what they seem on the outside. So on the outside we might just see like a shell in the edge of the beach, and if we look closer, if we try to look inside and try to dive deeper, we might see that there is a lot of layers inside this shell. There's a lot of things to gain wisdom from, or even just to observe. Looking at the night sky, we don't always have to gain wisdom from it. Sometimes it's just observing and being in awe that it's there. The other way of applying this symbolism is by looking at the moon itself. In my experience, the sun archetype represents super clarity. It represents like having all the answers or knowing everything, having a clear plan of action, a clear path forward. Whereas the moon represents something completely opposite, where it's unclear, it's sometimes confusion, it's sometimes haziness. Everything is just hazy right now. And that's just it's okay to be like that. So the moon being inside this shell instead of the sun, for example, it reminds me that even if we look inside and we don't have all the answers, sometimes we have to acknowledge that that's just the way that things are right now. We're not looking at the sun inside the shell. We look closer and all we can find is more confusion. Sometimes we have to just do what we feel or what we think is best based on what we know now. And trust that, we will be able to handle the consequences that come from the actions that we choose based on what we know now. The next High Priestess I'll mention is from, the Gaian Tarot. This is a relatively new deck for me. I bought this secondhand as a part of a huge deck bundle last year, and I almost wrote this off because I didn't think it was my type. But I saw Laura at Aquamarine 18 mention the Gaian Tarot, how she did a whole deck study on this. So I'm holding on to the deck for now, and I'm giving it a second chance. I did look at the majors so far of the Gaian Tarot for this tag, for this activity. And I do really like the High Priestess compared to a lot of other High Priestesses across all the other decks. So the High Priestess in this Gaian Tarot, we see someone who almost seems to be like of two different ages. So we see someone who on one side has gray hairs, and the other side they have like a younger look. What I'm getting from this card is that hindsight is 2020. It's very easy to look back at situations that have already passed and cringe at ourselves and think like, I wish I had done better. I wish I had known better. But the truth is, there's no way that I could have known better. I just can't. I'm not omniscient. I only know better now because I've actually gone through that situation and made those mistakes, taken that course of action. Just seeing the duality here of like the young person and the older person, like in one body, we gain wisdom through experiencing life, through doing things, through observing things and just doing things as they are. There's no shortcut that we can take to be old and wise, as much as we try to learn and to read and to prepare for things before they happen, the only way that we actually get wiser is by just going through things. I will know what's best for me in the future when I actually get there, but for me right now, I just have to do the best with what I know. There's no like more study, more learning, no outside answers that I can seek that will make me a better person right now. I just have to trust that I know the best for me right now. The next priestess I'll mention is from the Modern Love Tarot. I did a walkthrough of this deck where I explained a lot of my personal associations with these cards. And for the High Priestess of the Modern Love Tarot, I mentioned that when I was growing up, I have not lived around a lot of older figures. Some people, especially Asian people, they tend to live in multi-generational households. They live with their grandmas and grandpas, even other aunts and uncles. I didn't have that. I only lived with my parents. And even my great aunts and uncles, I was never close to them growing up. So I never got to experience what it was like to receive wisdom from someone who actually lived with you or who saw you regularly. In college, though, I was involved in sorority, and we did have advisors who were older women, and older ranging from in their 20s to 50s and 60s. So we did have older women who did advise us college students on how to be better women, how to be better people, how to run our sorority properly. Okay, so another example. Going back to the example or incident I mentioned about how I used to run a role-playing group on Tumblr. One of my other co-admins at the time, someone who ran the group with me, I was a teenager. I was in my late 18, 17, 18, and she was like 27. You know, at the time, I didn't really think much about it, except for thinking, oh, how old she must be, because I was only used to being around other teenagers. Now that I'm older, I'm in my late 20s, I can't imagine helping run a group or being in a group that is run by like mostly teenagers. I'd feel so, I just wouldn't know how to interact in like a normal way with these teenagers, seeing them mess up and just knowing that sometimes they have to learn things for themselves. You know, I just don't know how I deal with that. I'd probably be very frustrated just seeing teenagers like be teenagers, like having teenage drama or sorting out their emotions. But I feel like that is what High Priestess energy is for advisors, you know, seeing their mentees having to figure out things on their own, for older people coexisting in the same spaces as younger people, seeing that they also have to figure things out on their own. Yeah, it's an interesting place to be. I've just always wondered what it would be like to grow up with a grandma or grandpa. Like, how much wisdom do they bestow to you, or do they bestow to your mom or dad, their child, versus how much do they just be like, yeah, not my problem. My child will figure it out in their own time. My grandchild will figure it out in their own time. I remember in middle school, we had an assignment where us kids, we like 7th graders, we had to find someone who was over 60 and do an interview with them where we asked them just a bunch of questions for class. Of course, a lot of people were like, oh yeah, I'll ask my grandpa, my grandma, my great aunt, whatever. You know, I didn't have those things. My dad's parents were in Vietnam. My mom's mom, you know, lives in a different state. So I just didn't have many like elderly influences that I grew up with. So if you have grown up with like elderly influences, I'd just love to hear what that experience was like for you as a kid growing up. And the last High Priestess I'll mention is from the Little Avatar Tarot. I have another story about this priestess imagery. In this card, we see the more like traditional, kind of religious or spiritual or mystical priestess, someone who is maybe doing divination. She seems to be working with bones. She's got tea in front of her. She's reading from a book. Out of these 5 priestesses, this feels the most like traditional or mystical priestess to me. Personal story about this card. So when I was in high school, my parents found a local priestess. And in Vietnamese, she was called like Hoàng Cô. I don't know if that was like her name or the title for priestess, but that was what we called her. Every so often, my parents like would go to see her and consult her about their problems. And I would often have to be dragged along, and it was very boring for me. Like I mentioned, I hate being bored. I hated being bored as a teenager, so I really just hated having to wait there. I do remember occasionally my parents like would ask me to come into the priestess room with them because they had questions to ask about me. And the priestess would, you know, do her divination. There was usually someone who was manning the drums, like boom, 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 boom. There would be little like drumming patterns, and she would just flick her long fingernails to be like this. I don't have nails, but you can imagine what they sound like. But just doing these fancy motions. You know, now I'm pretty agnostic. I'm open to anything mystical or universe feeling. But as a teenager, I really thought it was all hokey. It was all just ridiculous. And I really just wanted to go home. Not only did I not believe in this mystical stuff, I also felt very insulted and offended that my parents would not talk to me and understand me. They wanted to talk to this priestess to talk in my behalf. That experience really turned me off from mysticism for a very long time. But, you know, I have a new appreciation for priestesses now as an adult. I can see that even though I didn't really believe in the mysticism back then, people do believe in mystical things. With readings that I've done for my friends and acquaintances, even though for me, I have my own beliefs about the cards, for me, I just see them very secularly, I can see that they have very almost magical effects on the people that I read for. It is really nice to see that kind of magic through someone else's eyes instead of my own formerly cynical lens. So with this High Priestess, I just really appreciate this like reminder. Sometimes you just have to trust in the outside powers, the outside forces. Similar to what I mentioned before with other priestesses about how sometimes you don't exactly know like what the future is going to hold. You have to do the best with what you know now. This High Priestess, even if she's trying to divine the future, she only still tells you like what she can figure out from the present point of speculation. The High Priestess can't map out like your entire future and tell you like the 5 next steps you have to take. She can only give you a vague idea of what step to take and or what one next step to take is. And it kind of makes you think about how I can embody that kind of like diviner energy, the like mysterious energy, or the like, you know, we're gonna throw bones on a table, we're gonna try to read them, we're gonna make meaning with what we get. If it's a lot, great. If it's a little bit, great. We'll work with what we have. I think that's the High Priestess energy in a nutshell, really. We'll work with what we have. All right, that's some of my favorite High Priestess cards and some examples of High Priestess energy for me. These took a while for me to find and parse together, but after going through this exercise of finding memoirs and finding connections for myself, I really do feel like I understand the priestess energy a little bit more. I'll have to look through some of my other decks to see what they've renamed the priestess, because I also do appreciate more gender neutral renamings, because again, I don't always connect to like female archetypes. I don't really consider myself like a woman. I don't know what I am. I'm just a person, really. Just, I feel better about the High Priestess archetype now that I've done this whole exercise. For the viewers who are more secular or agnostic, maybe don't really have beliefs in mystical things or spiritual things, I'm especially curious to hear if you do have experiences with the mystical, or if you find ways to connect with the High Priestess that actually make sense for you. And as always, if you have favorite High Priestess cards of your own or keywords of your own, I'd love to hear them as well. We can all share knowledge here, group our knowledge together. Your inner wisdom is my inner wisdom too. And we will leave it at that. All right, that is all I got for you today. Thanks for watching. Bye.